The call came at 10:43 p.m., exactly 3 minutes later than usual. I noticed because Ethan was almost never late. For the past few months, my nights had developed a strange little rhythm around him. I would finish whatever I was doing, leave my phone somewhere within reach, and sometime after 10:30, his name would light up the screen. Sometimes he had a story. Sometimes I did. Sometimes neither of us had anything worth saying, and we still managed to stay on the phone for an hour. That night, when I answered, Ethan said, "You sound tired." "I am tired. Long day." "You already know it was a long day." "I know you said it would be." "That doesn't mean I can't ask." I smiled despite myself and dropped onto the couch. 2 days earlier, I had mentioned an afternoon presentation I was dreading. I had forgotten the conversation almost immediately. Ethan apparently had not. "How did it go?" he asked. "Better than expected." "Knew it would." "You absolutely did not." "I had faith." "You sent me a message saying, 'Try not to embarrass yourself.' That was supportive in my language." We drifted from the presentation to a ridiculous argument about takeout, then to nothing at all. There was a stretch where I could hear him moving around his apartment while I stared at the ceiling. Neither of us hung up. Eventually I said, "By the way, I might not be around tomorrow night." The movement on his end stopped. "What do you mean?" "I have plans." There was a beat too long before he answered. "What plans?" I laughed. "Why do you sound like my parole officer?" "I don't." "You kind of do." "I'm asking a normal question." "Dinner. Maybe drinks afterward." "With who?" The sharpness in his voice made me sit up. "Ethan." "What?" "You know I'm allowed to have plans." "I know that." "Then why do you sound annoyed?" "I don't sound annoyed." "You definitely sound annoyed." He exhaled, then recovered quickly. "I'm devastated, Noah. Truly. How dare you abandon our sacred nightly conference?" There it was, the joke, smooth enough to make the moment disappear if I let it. Normally, I would have. Instead, I stared at his name glowing on my phone. "We talk every night," I said. "Apparently." "Why?" Silence. Then Ethan laughed softly. "Because you'd miss me if we didn't." He changed the subject before I could answer. And for the first time in months, I wondered when these calls had stopped being something that happened and become something Ethan seemed unwilling to lose. The next evening, I caught myself checking the time at 10:31. That annoyed me more than it should have. I was supposed to have plans, but they had shifted, leaving me home earlier than expected. I had not told Ethan. Part of me wanted to see what would happen if I simply stopped arranging my night around the assumption that he would call. At 10:39, my phone lit up. "Ethan." I let it ring twice before answering. "You're home," he said. "Hello to you too. I thought you had plans." "I did." "What happened?" "They changed." A pause. "Everything okay?" There was no teasing in the question. He had heard something in my voice, or thought he had. "Everything's fine." "Okay." He sounded relieved. That should not have meant anything. Ethan was my best friend. Best friends notice things. Best friends checked in. Still, after the night before, I started paying attention. Once I did, the pattern became impossible not to see. The calls were never as random as I had treated them. If Ethan knew I had an early morning, he called earlier. If he was busy at our usual time, I would get a message first. "Running late. Don't disappear." If I sounded exhausted, he shortened whatever story he had planned to tell me. If I was irritated, he stayed until he had made me laugh. And Ethan almost always called first. A few nights later, I finally pointed it out. "You know something weird?" "Many things." "Narrow it down." "You call me every night." "You've discovered phones." "I'm serious." "So am I." Incredible technology. I ignored him. "When did this start?" He went quiet for half a second. "I don't know." "You don't know?" "Noah. I don't keep minutes from our friendship. It's been months." "Okay. And it's basically every night." "Are you complaining?" The question sounded casual, but something underneath it made me hesitate. "No." "Then what's the problem?" "There isn't one. I just realized I don't know why we started doing it." He gave a small laugh. It's just what we do. The answer was so simple that I almost accepted it. Almost. Over the following days, I noticed something else. Ethan did not merely call when he had nothing better to do. One night he mentioned that he had left a gathering earlier than everyone else. You could have stayed, I said. I'd had enough. You always stay too long. Maybe I'm growing. Terrifying. He laughed and we moved on. But I looked at the clock. 10:47. Another evening he called while still on his way home. I could hear traffic around him. You know you can call me later, I said. I know. Then why are you calling while walking? Because I wanted to talk to you. He said it without emphasis, as if there were nothing remarkable about it. Maybe there wasn't. That was the problem. Every individual thing Ethan did had an explanation. We had known each other for years. He remembered things because he was attentive. He checked on me because we were close. He called because calling had become routine. But explanations that worked individually started feeling less convincing when I stacked them together. Near the end of one call, neither of us had spoken for almost a minute. You still there? I asked. Yeah. You have anything else to say? No, neither do I. Another silence. You could hang up, I said. So could you. I smiled into the dark. Neither of us did. I thought about his answer from earlier. It's just what we do. Maybe that was true. But for the first time, I found myself wondering what would happen if one of us wanted something that didn't fit inside what we had always done. And, increasingly, I wondered whether Ethan already did. By Saturday afternoon, Maya had apparently decided my romantic life required intervention. We were sitting in a coffee shop after work when she put down her cup and said, "You should go out with Daniel." I looked up. Who? Daniel. The guy I mentioned. That does not help. The one who asked if you were single. I remembered him vaguely. Maya had brought him up once before, and I had done what I usually did when someone suggested a date. Found a reason not to think about it. I'm fine, I said. That wasn't the question. I didn't hear a question. Fine. Would you like to keep waiting indefinitely for your life to become interesting on its own? I stared at her. That was unnecessarily aggressive. It was efficient. I laughed, but her point landed harder than I wanted it to. For months, my evenings had somehow become occupied without me ever making a decision about them. I worked, went home, and eventually Ethan called. I had started treating that pattern like part of the architecture of my life. Maybe Maya was right. Okay, I said. She blinked. Okay, I'll go. Her expression shifted into suspicious delight. Seriously, before you make me regret it. She immediately reached for her phone. That night, Ethan called at 10:36. I was still thinking about Maya's triumphant face when I answered. What did you do today? Ethan asked. Worked. Had coffee with Maya. Thrilling. She set me up on a date. Silence. Not long. Maybe 2 seconds. Still, I noticed. With who? A guy named Daniel. Daniel what? I laughed. Why? I'm asking. I don't know if I'm authorized to release his full identity. Very funny. There was an edge beneath the words. I leaned back against the couch. You know Maya. She wouldn't set me up with somebody terrible. That's optimistic. You like Maya? I do. That doesn't mean she has good judgment. She's friends with me. Exactly my point. I smiled, but Ethan did not immediately laugh. So when is it? He asked. Thursday. What time? Dinner. What time, Noah? I frowned. 7:30. Another pause. Thursday. Our calls usually happened hours later, but we both knew dinner could become drinks, and drinks could become something else. For the first time, I wondered if Ethan was calculating the same thing. Why? I asked. No reason. You're asking a lot of questions for no reason. I'm making conversation. About a guy you've never met. I'm making sure he's not an idiot. You're doing that by knowing what time dinner starts? That's phase 1. I laughed, and this time Ethan joined me, but his laugh sounded forced. He changed the subject. 20 minutes later, we had moved. On to work, a movie he wanted me to watch, and an argument about whether I had ever actually returned something I borrowed from him. But when the conversation finally slowed, Ethan did not hang up. Neither did I. The silence felt different now. I thought about all the evenings he had rearranged without being asked. All the details he remembered. The way he had reacted when I said I might miss one call. And now Daniel. You still there? I asked. Yeah. You got quiet. Tired. Right? I could have asked him then. Instead, I let the silence stretch. Eventually Ethan said, almost too casually, So Thursday, 7:30. I stared at the ceiling. Yes. Okay. That was all. But after we hung up, I lay awake thinking about the question he had asked twice. Not whether I wanted to see Daniel. Not whether I was excited. What time? For the first time, it occurred to me that Ethan might not be worried about who I was going to dinner with. He might be worried about whether I would still be available when he called. Thursday arrived with the irritating feeling that I was being observed by someone who wasn't even there. At 7:30, I met Daniel at the restaurant. He was easy to talk to, funny without trying too hard, interested without turning every question into an interview. Under different circumstances, I might have relaxed enough to enjoy myself without analyzing it. Instead, sometime after 9, I caught myself wondering what time Ethan would call. I hated that, so when my phone vibrated against my pocket, I deliberately left it there. Daniel was telling me a story. I listened. A few minutes later, the phone vibrated again. I ignored it. We finished dinner and stayed for another drink. By the time I stepped outside, Daniel and I had already agreed that the evening had been nice without pretending it had become something more. Only then did I take out my phone. 2 missed calls from Ethan. 3 messages. You alive? Guess the date's going well. Noah? The last one had arrived 8 minutes earlier. I stared at it before calling him. He answered immediately. Finally. Hello to you too. You could have answered. I was on a date. I know. Then why did you call twice? I didn't know you were still there. I stopped walking. You knew dinner started at 7:30. That was hours ago. Yes, dates sometimes last longer than 45 minutes. I'm aware of how dates work. Are you? He went silent. Cars passed along the street behind me, and for once there was no comfortable emptiness between us. What happened? Ethan asked. With what? The date. I almost laughed. You called me repeatedly, and now you want a review? I called twice, and messaged 3 times. I was checking on you. Why? Because you weren't answering. That's not an answer. Another silence. I could hear him breathe. Were you worried something happened to me? I asked. Yes. The response came too quickly. Ethan, I was at a restaurant with someone Maya knows. Things can still happen. What exactly did you think happened? I don't know. That's convenient. His voice hardened. Why are you making this into something? The question landed harder than I expected. Maybe because I had been asking myself the same thing for days. I'm not sure I am. What does that mean? It means you call me every night. You change your schedule to do it. You remember when I'm supposed to be home. You get weird when I say I might not answer. And tonight you knew exactly why I wasn't available, but you still kept trying. I was worried. You keep saying that. Because it's true. I looked through the restaurant window. Daniel was gone now, leaving only strangers behind the glass. Worried about me? I said. Or worried I wouldn't answer you? Ethan said nothing. For 1 second, I thought I had finally pushed him far enough. Then he exhaled. You're my best friend, Noah. Of course I worry about you. There it was. A perfectly reasonable explanation. Except it no longer felt big enough to contain everything around it. Right? I said. What? Nothing. Noah. I should go home. He sounded frustrated now. So that's it. What do you want me to say? I don't know. Neither do I. That was the first honest thing either of us had said in several minutes. We hung up without our usual pointless delay. When I reached my apartment, the silence felt wrong. For months, Ethan's voice had occupied this hour so consistently that I had stopped noticing the space it filled. Now I noticed. I set my phone on the table and looked at the dark screen. Ethan had said he was worried. Maybe he was. But I could no longer pretend that explained why one missed call had sounded, to both of us, like something being taken away. The next night, Ethan called at 10:38. I watched his name glow on the screen until the fourth ring. For the first time in months, I considered not answering. Then I did. "Hey," he said. "Hey." He waited, as though expecting our usual rhythm to rescue us. "How was work?" "Fine. Just fine. Pretty much." Another pause. Normally Ethan would have filled it with something ridiculous until I gave in and laughed. Tonight, he seemed to understand that pretending nothing had happened would only make it worse. Finally he said, "Are you still mad?" "I'm not mad. You sound mad." "I'm trying to understand something." He went quiet. I stood by my apartment window, looking at my reflection in the glass. "Why do you call me every night?" "Noah, I asked you before. You joked about it." "Because we're friends." "That explains calling me." "It doesn't explain this." "This what?" "Every night. Changing your plans. Knowing when I'm supposed to be home. Calling twice when you know I'm on a date." "I already apologized." "I'm not asking for an apology." "What are you asking for?" "The truth." Silence. I could hear him breathing on the other end. "You're making it sound bigger than it is," Ethan said. "Then make it smaller." "What?" "Explain it." He did not. That silence answered more than another joke could have. "I went out with someone for one night," I said. "And you acted like something had changed between us. Maybe I didn't like being ignored." "You weren't being ignored. I was unavailable." "I know. Then why did it matter?" His answer came quietly. "I don't know." I closed my eyes. "That's not good enough anymore." For several seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Ethan said, "I just hate not knowing if I'll hear your voice." Everything in me went still. There was no joke after it. No laugh. No easy explanation. "Ethan, I shouldn't have said that." "Why?" "Because now you're going to make it mean something." "What am I supposed to make it mean?" "I don't know. You keep saying that." "Because I don't have a better answer." The frustration in his voice was real, but underneath it was something I had never heard from him before. Fear. I sat down. "You could just tell me what's going on." "I am telling you." "No. You're giving me pieces." He was quiet again. Then he said, "Can I come over?" I looked toward the door. "Now?" "Yeah." 20 minutes later, there was a knock. When I opened the door, Ethan stood in the hallway looking less composed than I had ever seen him after one of our arguments. I stepped aside. He came in. For a while, neither of us seemed to know what to do without a phone between us. Ethan eventually sat beside me on the couch, closer than he normally would. Our shoulders nearly touched. Neither of us moved away. "You really hated not hearing from me?" I asked. His eyes stayed on the floor. "Yes." "Why?" His jaw tightened. "I told you. I don't know how to explain it." "That's different from not knowing." He looked at me then. The distance between us suddenly felt much smaller. For one dangerous second, I became intensely aware of his knee beside mine, his shoulder inches from me, the fact that I could remember hundreds of hours of his voice in the dark and almost none of them had ever felt as intimate as this silence. But Ethan did not touch me. I did not touch him. Eventually he said, "I don't want this to get weird." I almost laughed. "I think we're past that." A reluctant smile appeared, then disappeared. Nothing was solved when he left. He still had not told me why the calls had started. I still did not know what he wanted from me. But one thing had changed permanently. Ethan had finally admitted that hearing my voice every night mattered to him. And after sitting beside him in that charged silence, I could no longer pretend that learning why mattered only because I was curious. The next morning, I woke up with the uncomfortable feeling that something between Ethan and me had moved, without either of us deciding where it was going. The words he had said the night before kept returning to me. "I just hate not knowing if I'll hear your voice." It was not a declaration. It was not an explanation, but it was too honest to forget. By lunchtime, I had replayed the conversation enough times to know I was getting nowhere. So I met Maya for coffee. She took one look at me and said, "You look terrible." "Thank you." "You're welcome." I told her about the argument, the calls, and Ethan coming over. I did not tell her what I wanted the answer to be. I was not even sure I knew. When I finished, Maya stirred her coffee. "You keep asking him to explain himself," she said. "Yes." "Have you explained yourself?" I frowned. "What am I supposed to explain? Why this matters so much to you?" "It matters because he's acting strangely." "That's not what I asked." I looked away. She let the silence sit there. "I don't want to lose him," I finally said. "I know. And I don't want to spend the rest of my life wondering whether I imagined all of this." "That sounds more honest." I gave her a tired look. She smiled slightly. "You don't have to decide what he feels, but you do have to decide what you're willing to accept." That stayed with me after we left. That evening, Ethan called later than usual. I answered, "Hey, hey." Neither of us mentioned the night before for several seconds. Then Ethan said, "About yesterday." "I know. I didn't mean to make things complicated." I almost laughed. "You already did." "I know." The apology sounded different this time. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked. "Tell you what?" "That you were thinking about leaving." Silence. My stomach tightened. "What are you talking about?" "I was going to tell you." "When?" "Soon." "Ethan." He exhaled. "I got an offer." The words landed quietly. "For what?" "A job." "Where?" "Another city." I sat down. "How long have you known?" "A little while." "And you were still calling me every night?" "Yes." "Why?" "I don't know." I closed my eyes. That answer hurt more now. The calls had become the one thing I could count on. Now I was learning there was an expiration date hanging over them that I had never known existed. "When do you have to decide?" "Soon." "How soon?" "A few days." I looked at the phone in my hand. "So all this time you knew you might leave." "I didn't know if I was going to take it." "But you knew it was possible." "Yes." "And you never told me." "I was trying to figure it out." "You could have let me know you were figuring it out." "I know." The frustration in my chest finally broke through. "You wanted me available every night, Ethan. You wanted to hear my voice. You wanted me to answer. You wanted to know what I was doing. But you couldn't tell me that you might be gone." "I wasn't trying to hide it." "You were." He said nothing. I thought about the first night he had called, the hundreds of nights after it, all those ordinary conversations that suddenly felt less ordinary because I now knew they had been happening beneath a clock. "When did the calls start?" I asked. "Before the job offer." That answer stopped me. Before I could ask anything else, Ethan said, "I have to go." The call ended. I stared at the screen. The job explained the pressure. It did not explain the calls. And somehow, that made the unanswered question feel even more important. For the first time in months, I looked at the clock and did not expect my phone to ring. It was 10:42, then 10:47, then 10:53. The silence should have felt ordinary. Instead, it felt like something had been removed from the room. I kept telling myself that was the point. Ethan had an offer in another city. He had known about it for a while. He had also known that his nightly calls had become important to me without ever telling me what they meant to him. I could not keep pretending that was enough. At 11:06, my phone finally lit up. "Ethan." I stared at his name. Then I answered. "Hey, hey." Neither of us spoke for a moment. "You didn't call," I said. "I know. I noticed. I figured." His voice sounded tired. "Ethan, we need to stop doing this." "Doing what?" "Pretending these calls are just a habit." He was silent. "I can't keep giving you every night," I continued. "While you refuse to tell me what I am to you. You're my best friend." "I know. That hasn't changed." "That's exactly the problem." He breathed out slowly. "What do you want me to say?" "I want you to say something you actually mean." "I do mean that." "I know you do. But you also told me you hate not hearing my voice." You call me every night. You get upset when I'm unavailable. You're thinking about moving away, and somehow you still expect this to continue exactly the same. I never said that. You didn't have to. He was quiet again. I looked down at my hand. I want something real someday, I said. A relationship. Someone who actually chooses me. I can't keep pretending this is nothing while also acting like I belong to you every night. I never said you belonged to me. I know. The words came out softer than I expected. That's why this hurts. There was a long silence. Then Ethan said, "So what are you asking me to do? Until you know what you want, stop calling me like this." His breath caught. Okay. The word was barely audible. I closed my eyes. Okay. We ended the call. I left my phone on the table and tried to sleep. At 11:30, nothing. 11:45, nothing. Midnight, still nothing. The absence was almost louder than his voice had ever been. I turned onto my side and stared at the ceiling. I had wanted the calls to stop because I wanted an answer. Now that they had stopped, I understood exactly what I was risking. Not a routine. Not a few hours of conversation. Him. And for the first time, Ethan had to understand that the same thing was true in reverse. He could keep calling me his best friend. He could keep pretending the nightly ritual meant nothing. He could even leave. But he could not keep asking for the intimacy of something more while refusing to choose what that something was. At 12:17, my phone remained silent. I turned it face down. For months, Ethan had always been the one to make the call. This time, I was the one choosing not to wait. At 12:17, I turned my phone face down and told myself I would not look at it again. I lasted 11 minutes. There were no new messages. I put the phone away and tried to sleep. Then came 3 quiet knocks at my door. I froze. For a second, I could not move. Then, I crossed the apartment and opened it. Ethan stood in the hallway. He was not holding his phone. That was the first thing I noticed. "You said no more calls," he said. "I did. So I came here." I stepped aside. He entered slowly, then stopped a few feet from me. "I thought about what you said." I folded my arms. "And I have to tell you why." My chest tightened. "Why what?" "Why I called." I said nothing. Ethan looked at the floor, then back at me. "Months ago, you told me you were ready to find something serious." I remembered. It had been an ordinary conversation. I had complained that every relationship I had tried seemed temporary. I had said I wanted something that actually lasted. "I went home that night," Ethan continued, "and I kept thinking about it." He swallowed. "I kept imagining you meeting someone you actually wanted to be with, someone who would become the person you talked to at the end of every day." I stared at him. "And that bothered you?" "It terrified me." The words were quiet. I didn't know what to do with that feeling. "So I called you." "The first night." "Yes." "And the next night?" "I called again." "Why?" "Because the first call made me realize how much I wanted to hear your voice." I could barely breathe. Ethan continued before I could interrupt. "After that, I told myself it was just because we were close. Then I told myself it was because we had always been friends. Then I stopped trying to explain it. You knew." I knew something was wrong with the explanation. He looked directly at me. "I just didn't want to know what the truth meant." Everything suddenly rearranged itself. The questions about Daniel. The missed calls. The way Ethan always knew when I sounded tired. The nights when neither of us had anything to say but neither wanted to hang up. "You could have told me." I was scared. "Of me. Of losing you." I let out a slow breath. "And the job. I was considering it before you knew. But I realized something." "What?" "I could leave the city and still have a job. I could change everything around me and figure it out." He took a step closer. "But I couldn't keep doing this." "Doing what?" "Calling you every night because it was the only way I could have the part of you I wanted without admitting I wanted more." The room went completely quiet. Ethan looked terrified now. "I don't want to hide behind the calls anymore." "What do you want?" He hesitated only once. "You." My eyes burned. "I want you as more than my best friend." I want an actual relationship with you. And I don't know yet what I'm going to do about the job. But I know I don't want that decision to be an excuse for never telling you the truth. For months, I had imagined this moment in 100 different ways. None of them felt as simple as this. So say it again, I whispered. His expression softened. I love you, Noah. I want to be with you. I stepped closer. You really should have figured that out before calling me every night for months. He laughed, nervous and relieved at once. I know. Then I kissed him. It was not dramatic. It was just the first honest thing either of us had done with those feelings. When we pulled apart, Ethan stayed close. So, he said quietly, does this mean I can call you tomorrow? I smiled. You don't have to call anymore. For the first time, he smiled without hiding behind a joke. I know, and that was the point. He had finally chosen to come through the door instead of hiding behind the phone. The next morning, nothing about the apartment looked different. The same coffee mug sat beside the sink. The same jacket hung over the back of the chair. My phone was still on the table where I had left it the night before, but everything felt different. Ethan was sitting across from me, holding his coffee with both hands. So, he said, we're actually doing this? I smiled. You asked me for a relationship last night. I know. You seemed pretty serious. I was. Good. He smiled. There was still one thing hanging between us. The job, I said. His expression became thoughtful. I haven't decided yet. Okay. I don't want you thinking I'm staying because I'm afraid to leave. I don't. And I don't want you thinking I'm leaving because I don't want this. I don't think that either. He looked relieved. We'll figure it out, I said. He nodded. For months we had acted as if being close meant we did not have to say what we wanted. Now, for the first time, we could talk about the future without pretending the conversation was only about friendship. That night, I was getting ready for bed when my phone rang. 10:43. I looked at the screen. Ethan. I laughed. He was only a few steps away, standing outside my apartment door. I opened it. You called. He held up his phone. Habit. I shook my head. After everything, you're still calling me? He smiled. I'm allowed now. I stepped aside and let him in. That's different. How? Before, you called because you were afraid to tell me why. And now you can just say you want to hear my voice. He looked at me for a moment. I do. I reached for his hand. The phone was still connected, but neither of us said anything into it. Ethan ended the call. Then he stayed. That was the part that mattered. The calls had never really been about the phone. They had been about choosing the person on the other end. For months, Ethan had needed an excuse to make that choice. Now he didn't. And when the familiar hour came the next night, I knew exactly why he would call. Not because he was afraid of losing me. Not because he needed a reason to stay close. Because we had finally stopped pretending that choosing each other needed one.